Right now, your entire life savings is sitting inside a building made of concrete, glass, and fluorescent lights. You've never actually seen your money. You've never held it, counted it, or locked it in a safe under your bed. It's just a number on a screen. And that number only exists because you trust that the building will be there tomorrow. But what happens when that trust disappears? Not slowly, not over years. What happens when it disappears in a single afternoon because somebody whispered the wrong sentence to the wrong person? In October of 1907, the entire American financial system almost collapsed. Not because of a war, not because of a drought or a famine or a plague. It collapsed because of a rumor that started with two greedy men, a pile of copper, and a scheme so stupid it almost destroyed the United States economy. To understand what happened, you need to understand what America looked like in 1907. There was no Federal Reserve. There was no central bank. There was no government agency whose job it was to step in and save the economy if something went wrong. The entire American banking system was basically a massive game of trust. You gave your money to a bank. The bank promised to keep it safe. But the bank didn't actually keep your money in a vault. It took your money and lent it out to businesses, to real estate developers, to railroad companies. If everything went well, the bank made a profit, you got a small interest payment, and everybody was happy. But if too many people showed up at the same time and asked for their money back, the bank had a very serious problem. Because the money was gone. It was scattered across 100 different loans and investments. The bank couldn't just snap its fingers and get it all back in an hour. This was the terrifying weakness hiding inside every single bank in America. It worked perfectly as long as everybody stayed calm, as long as nobody panicked, as long as nobody asked the one question that could destroy everything. Is my money actually still there? Now, enter two men, Augustus Heinze and Charles W. Morse. Heinze was a copper baron from Montana. He had made a fortune mining copper out of the mountains and had recently moved to New York City to play the big leagues. Morse was a Wall Street financier who had already made millions controlling the ice trade in New York. Yes, the ice trade. Before refrigerators existed, somebody had to cut massive blocks of ice out of frozen rivers and sell them to the city. Morse controlled that entire business. These two men were not satisfied being rich. They wanted to be powerful. And they came up with a plan. Heinze owned a company called United Copper. He believed that a group of rival investors were secretly shorting his stock. Shorting means they were borrowing shares of United Copper, selling them immediately, and planning to buy them back later at a lower price to pocket the difference. Heinze's plan was simple and brutal. He and Morse would buy up every single available share of United Copper on the open market. If they could corner the entire supply of the stock, the short sellers would be trapped. They would be forced to buy shares back at whatever insane price Heinze decided to charge. It was called a corner, and if it worked, Heinze and Morse would make an absolute fortune. On Monday, October 14th, 1907, they launched the attack. Heinze started aggressively buying United Copper stock. The price started climbing. On Tuesday, the price jumped from $39 to $60 a share. Everything was going according to plan. Then, on Wednesday, Heinze made his move. He called the short sellers bluff and demanded they return the borrowed shares immediately. But instead of panicking and buying at Heinze's inflated price, the short sellers did something Heinze did not expect. They found shares somewhere else. It turned out that Heinze didn't actually control as many shares as he thought he did. The short sellers were able to cover their positions without buying from him at all. The corner had failed, and when the market realized the scheme had collapsed, the price of United Copper crashed. It went from $60 to $10 in a single day. Now, a failed stock gamble is embarrassing, but it wouldn't normally destroy a country. Here is where it gets terrifying. Heinze wasn't just using his own money to fund this scheme. He was using money from banks. Specifically, he was the president of a bank called the Mercantile National Bank, and Morse was on the board of multiple banks and trust companies across New York. The moment the copper scheme failed, a very dangerous question started spreading across Wall Street. If the president of Mercantile National Bank just lost millions of dollars on a failed stock gamble, is my money safe in his bank? That single question was the match that lit the fire. Within hours, depositors started lining up outside the Mercantile National Bank. They wanted their money, not tomorrow, not next week, right now. The bank couldn't pay them all. It didn't have enough cash on hand because most of the deposits were tied up in loans. This is what economists call a bank run. And a bank run is not a rational economic event. It is a stampede. It is a survival instinct. It is hundreds of human brains, all firing the same ancient signal at the same time. Get out now, before it's too late. But here's the truly terrifying part about a bank run. It doesn't matter if the bank is actually healthy. It doesn't matter if the bank has enough assets to cover every single deposit. If enough people believe the bank is failing, and they all show up to withdraw their money at the same time, the bank will fail, because no bank on earth keeps 100% of its deposits in cash, ready to hand out on demand. The belief creates the reality. The rumor becomes the truth. A perfectly healthy bank can be destroyed in a single afternoon by nothing more than fear. The panic spread. Depositors didn't just run from Mercantile National Bank. They started running from every bank that Heinze and Morse had ever touched. And these two men had their fingers in a lot of banks. One by one, institution after institution started facing lines of terrified depositors, demanding their cash. And then, the dominoes hit the big one. The Knickerbocker Trust Company was the third largest trust company in New York City. It held deposits from some of the wealthiest people in America. Its president was a man named Charles T. Barney, and Charles T. Barney had one very unfortunate problem. He was a known associate of Charles Morse. That's it. He didn't steal any money. He didn't gamble on copper. He was simply connected to the wrong person. And in a panic, that's all it takes. On Monday, October 21st, 1907, the National Bank of Commerce announced that it would no longer clear transactions for the Knickerbocker Trust Company. This was a death sentence. It was the financial equivalent of a hospital announcing that it would no longer treat a patient. Even if the patient wasn't actually dying, everyone would assume the worst. The next morning, October 22nd, a line of depositors stretched around the block outside the Knickerbocker's headquarters on Fifth Avenue. In less than 3 hours, depositors withdrew $8 million. By noon, the Knickerbocker Trust Company was forced to lock its doors. The third largest trust company in New York City was dead, killed not by fraud, not by theft, and not by bad investments, killed by a rumor that spread faster than the truth. And now the real nightmare began, because if the mighty Knickerbocker could fall, then no bank was safe. The panic became a self-fulfilling prophecy. People ran to withdraw money from the Trust Company of America. They ran from the Lincoln Trust Company. They ran from any bank that looked even slightly vulnerable. Interest rates on the New York Stock Exchange skyrocketed to 70%, then 100%. The stock market was on the verge of a complete shutdown. The entire American economy was teetering on the edge of total collapse, and there was no government agency to save it. No Federal Reserve, no bailout fund, no safety net of any kind. Enter John Pierpont Morgan. J.P. Morgan was 70 years old, and he was arguably the most powerful private citizen in the United States. He was a banker, a financier, and a man who had personally organized the rescue of the U.S. Treasury once before, back in 1895. When the panic hit, Morgan was the only man in America with enough money, enough connections, and enough authority to stop the bleeding, and he knew it. Morgan called an emergency meeting at his private library on Madison Avenue. He summoned the presidents of the biggest banks in New York. He sat them down and essentially told them that they were going to save the financial system, whether they liked it or not. Morgan personally examined the books of every struggling institution. He made a brutal split-second decision for each one. If the bank was fundamentally solvent, just suffering from a temporary cash crisis, Morgan organized an emergency loan. If the bank was rotten to the core, he let it die. He was judge, jury, and central banker, all in one 70-year-old man. U.S. Treasury Secretary George Cortelyou rushed to New York and deposited $25 million of federal money into the city's banks. John D. Rockefeller, the richest man in America, deposited $10 million of his own money and called the Associated Press to announce it publicly. Morgan even personally purchased $30 million in City of New York bonds to prevent the city government from going bankrupt. One by one, the fires were put out, not by the government, not by a central bank, by a single 70-year-old man and his friends. The panic eventually subsided, but the damage was catastrophic. Hundreds of banks across the country had failed. The stock market had lost nearly 50% of its value from its peak the year before. Businesses collapsed, workers were laid off, farms were foreclosed, and the entire crisis was triggered by two greedy men, a pile of copper, and a chain reaction of fear that no institution was designed to stop. The aftermath changed America forever. Congress looked at what had just happened and realized something deeply unsettling. The only reason the economy hadn't completely imploded was because one very old, very rich man happened to be alive and happened to be willing to help. What if Morgan had been sick? What if he had said no? What if he had simply decided it wasn't his problem? The entire United States economy would have collapsed because there was no system in place to prevent it. 6 years later, in 1913, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act. It created the Federal Reserve System, America's first central bank. Its entire purpose was to make sure that the country would never again have to rely on the personal generosity of a single billionaire to survive a financial crisis. The Federal Reserve exists because of the panic of 1907. It exists because a rumor about a copper scheme destroyed a trust company, and nobody had the tools to stop the fire from spreading. But here's the part of this story that should keep you up at night. In 1907, the rumor spread by word of mouth. A nervous banker whispered to a colleague. A wealthy depositor overheard a conversation at a club. A newspaper printed a headline the next morning. The rumor moved at the speed of human conversation. It took days to destroy the Knickerbocker. Now, fast forward to March 2023. Silicon Valley Bank was one of the most important banks in the American tech industry. It held deposits from thousands of startups, venture capital firms, and tech companies. And when a report came out showing that the bank had lost money on its bond portfolio, something happened that would have been impossible in 1907. The rumor didn't spread by whisper, it spread by tweet. Prominent venture capitalists went on Twitter and publicly told their portfolio companies to pull their money out immediately. Founders texted each other. Group chats exploded. Within hours, $42 billion was withdrawn. Not in days, not in weeks, in a single day. Silicon Valley Bank collapsed in less than 48 hours. It was the second largest bank failure in American history, and it was caused by the exact same primitive human instinct that destroyed the Knickerbocker in 1907. The only difference was the speed. The panic of 1907 took weeks to unfold. The SVB collapse took hours. The next one might take minutes, because the fundamental problem has never been solved. We built the Federal Reserve, and we built deposit insurance, and we built 100 layers of regulation. But none of that changes the underlying truth. Your money is not in the bank. It has never been in the bank. Your money is a promise, and a promise is only as strong as the number of people who believe in it. The day the Knickerbocker Trust Company locked its doors on Fifth Avenue, the depositors standing outside didn't lose their money because the bank was bankrupt. They lost their money because everyone believed the bank was bankrupt. And in a system built entirely on trust, belief, and reality are the exact same thing. The next time you check your bank balance on your phone, remember this. That number is not a fact, it's a consensus. And a consensus can collapse in the time it takes to send a tweet.